Guys, have you ever picked up a paper and said, what goes into that? You ever watch a television show and say, what goes into that? Same for websites. You ever heard the Carolina Weekly story? Well, we're going to talk to the man who makes that happen, a newspaper man in the digital age. Paul Gable is our guest on All American People. I'm Jack Murphy, filling in for Greg Everett, and we'll be right back. Hello there, welcome to the WLSC Tiger Radio Studios, a place where I get to hang out every once in a while. Our guest comes by just to say hello because he's from these parts in a roundabout sort of way. At least he calls this place home. Wonderful Loris, South Carolina is where All American People takes place. Paul Gable is our guest. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Jack.
Good to see you.
And you.
Yeah,
and
you kind of live over here, right?
A couple miles from the station here, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've lived here since.
Here.
That's around here. Yeah. We've lived here since '96. In Loris.
In Loris.
Been in Horry County since '83, so.
I got to go back in time. What brought you to Horry County?
What brought us to Horry County? The weather.
Really? You must be from up north.
Boston. Well, my wife's from Boston. That's where we came down from.
Because you don't have the accent.
No. Harvard Yard.
Yeah.
No, we came down from Boston, and yeah, we came down to avoid the winters.
Where are you from originally? I know you.
I was born in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, among the Amish.
Really?
And I grew up there. And,
well, that explains the black shirt.
That
today.
explains the black shirt. If I'd have done it right, I'd.
And you watch All American People on your black and white TV, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That I have to crank because I don't have electricity.
Friends, though?
Yes. Well, no. I haven't.
Which one? It's a simple question.
That's pretty ridiculous,
Paul.
isn't it?
Yeah.
My aunt and uncle lived in the country in Lancaster County.
Okay.
And they lived next door to Amish people. So I guess we had Amish acquaintances. I don't know if you ever were really friends because they are very or were at least in the 50s, a very insular people. And you talk to them and this and that, but they quit school at the 8th grade, went to work on the farm full time, and really didn't want to have anything to do with the rest of society. I mean, in all honesty. And yet, within their own society,
I have days like that.
Well, yeah, but within their own society, it's very communal. You know, if you have a wedding, they'll put up a house and a barn over a weekend for a newly married couple and stuff like that. The whole community
gets together. Don't they have building inspectors up there?
Well, I don't know what the problems are.
Because I know that wouldn't be happening here in Horry County.
I don't know what the problems might be.
Put a house and a barn up in a weekend?
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, they're barn. In fact, I used to watch barn raisings as a little kid. Now, how did the building inspectors come in? I don't know. I didn't know about government when I was 10, but
I did.
But they did.
At 8.
I mean, you see them watch.
My dad made me watch Jesse Helms every night on the news. That explained things.
Would have been reason enough to hang yourself for crying out. Never make 9.
Oh, no.
But barn raisings. I mean, it was an amazing thing to watch. And the whole group from the church. I mean, it's a community inside the church, really. Right. Each individual church. They're there. The women have all the food, and they'll have a big tent out and stuff for the food underneath and what have you. And the men are out there building the buildings. And I mean, they'll do it on a weekend.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, living was I don't know if it was better, but it was kind of easier.
It was certainly easier. It was less hectic. And I think we all, at that time, I think we enjoyed it more. I mean, it was a pleasanter time. And maybe we always say that when we get old and we look back on when we were young and it was a pleasanter time. But it was a pleasanter time.
I used to laugh at my dad when he'd say the good old days, and now I find myself saying that. But my good old days were like 2007. So, I don't know. I was like, yeah, remember that, honey, when we could eat steak every night of the week? But how does that fit into your stance on journalism?
My stance? What I'm doing now, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, real neat because, I mean, for years I was in the newspaper business, traditional newspaper business. And then I kind of semi-retired a couple years ago.
So did the newspaper business for more.
Well, I think that might be more fully retired, almost. Yeah. And that's sad. I mean, in my opinion, that is very sad. But they haven't found a way to combat the problems that they face in this day and age. But the website is just fun. we feature people each week. We
Now, what is this website? Is it Carolina Weekly?
www.carolinaweekly.com.
Okay. Now, what sort of things are we going to find on there?
Well, you're going to find 5 profiles a week that I do. One of a citizen of the week, a public servant of the week, a nonprofit of the week, a business of the week, and a veteran of the week. And then we have 2 columns. One is TV Talk, where Pete Seeler writes from a perspective of what happened 50 years ago in television, and then he has what's happening now. And then Rhonda Rich does her Best of Dixie Divas column for us.
Okay. So it's not just you.
It's not just me, no.
Which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But you've got, I mean, not that, no, because
those two make it awesome.
you make a lot more content.
Yeah, we have, well, what I write is probably 700 to 1,000 words each. Rhonda probably runs around 500 with her column, and Pete can do 1,000 or more.
Yeah.
Easily.
Interesting, though, that he's the old TV guy. That interesting perspective.
Well, he's been in it forever, too. I mean,
Yeah.
he came in.
How old is he now? He got started when he was like a kid, had to.
Yeah, Pete's well into his 70s. I mean, he's been in it 60 years, at least. I'm not sure exactly, but he's no young guy. I mean, he's more than 10 years older than I am, and I'm going to be 65 in September. So Pete's been around television since television has been around television.
Yeah. I saw a newspaper, the old Laura Sentinel, from 1959, and on the front page was actually the selling of this station. Saw it the other day, which was kind of neat. And they had the whole program listing for both Channel 13 in Florence and TV6 in Wilmington. Had the whole week's listing included in the paper. And television, there's so much of it now. I think if you were on television back then, that you did have more impact then.
Well, you certainly had more impact. I mean,
I would think.
It's in my lifetime. Well, the television basically occurred, as far as a commercial object. It's certainly within my lifetime. I can remember when television came on in the morning and when it signed off at night.
Yeah.
It wasn't 24 hours a day.
Sure, yeah, those Star Spangled Banner.
I can remember, of course, Ozzie and Harriet and I Love Lucy and Jackie Gleason and Milton Berle and Arthur Godfrey and all those shows that you hear about. Some of it was. Well,
you saw them when they were on, like.
I saw them when they were on originally.
When they were new.
Yeah, and
wow.
and television at that time, Jack. To some extent, I think to a large extent, was the last days of pure vaudeville. Or at least the best of vaudeville.
Yeah, because a lot of the vaudeville radio and a lot of the shows that were so good were radio stars that transferred over.
And you had, you literally got to see, I as a child got to see vaudeville without, of course, having to go to the theaters in the 20s and 30s.
Unbelievable.
It really is. And when I think about that across my time, my lifetime, the changes that have occurred are just unbelievable, totally unbelievable.
Well, you followed politics for a long time. You said you didn't at 10. I was exposed to it kind of early and kind of.
Well, when I say I didn't at 10, I do recall sitting with my father watching the Army McCarthy hearings on television. I would have been about 8 at that time, I guess. Okay. And watching them and not quite understanding what was going on and asking a lot of questions about him. Then, of course, reading about him many years later. But I remember in 1952 the I Like Ike buttons, and when he got elected for president, and I was in the first grade. So but really getting into it, no, I was in high school before that occurred.
Okay.
The Kennedy election, I think, is the first one that I really.
Did you vote in that? Did you get to vote that year? Or was it?
No.
Probably 64 was your first election you got to vote in.
No, 68.
68.
Yeah, you had to be 21.
Really? When did they change 80 to 18? Was that under Nixon?
Yeah, I think so. Was that when I was out of the country in the 70s, I think. But yeah, my first election was 68 that I could vote in because the voting age was still 21. Yeah.
Do you think you were going to have a chance to vote for Johnson? At that time, was that possible for him to have been on the ticket? Since he came in on Kennedy's first term and.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
The way they amended that was to make it 2 terms or 10 years.
Right. Okay.
And Johnson came in little over a year left on Kennedy's first term, so he could have certainly run again, and everybody expected him to. And the night that he declared that he wasn't going to was a shock.
Yeah.
I remember watching that newscast, or that speech. It was a speech to the nation. And I remember watching that, and at the end of it, when he closed that way, my mouth fell open.
68, of course, the year that Nixon got in and stayed around there for a little while. My first memories of anything from Washington really was Watergate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it was on everything. I mean, we only got 3 networks.
Well, you know, I was not in the country then. I was in the Navy, and I was in Scotland at that time during Watergate, or during most of Watergate. I was actually in Puerto Rico when he resigned, but I went to Puerto Rico only 2 months in advance. But I will tell you this: when I was in Scotland, I lived next door to a little old lady. She was about 80 years old at that time, and her son-in-law was a big deal in the British Foreign Office, and he used to come up a couple times a year. The family would come up, and they'd visit her in Scotland and what have you. And I got to know him, and he didn't mind talking to the colonial a little bit, I guess. But he told me.
Did they still refer to you as that, the colonials?
He did the first time around. First time he met me, he said, colonial. And I said to him, well, John, it strikes me that at one time, now this was 1971, I said, it strikes me at one time the sun never set on the British Empire, and now if it's foggy in London, it doesn't rise. And from that point on, we were very great friends. We really were.
Great.
But he told me, he said, Nixon's in this up to his eyeballs. He told me that in 72, early 72. I said, there's no way. That would be incredibly stupid for him to be involved in this. He said, you watch, Nixon's in this up to his eyeballs.
He just got caught. Don't you think former presidents did incredibly stupid things before him?
We haven't had a president who hasn't done an incredibly stupid thing.
I don't want to talk about Benjamin Harrison, okay? But, you know, it's out there.
Or Grover Cleveland.
Which was kind of funky because president lost, came back, right?
1884 he won, and then he lost to Benjamin Harrison in 88, and then beat Benjamin Harrison in 92.
Yeah. Of course, there was that whole electoral college thing that Harrison came in on that was kind of...
Well, there was that, but I think the Electoral College was at its worst with the Tilden Hayes election in 1876.
Yeah, we're sorry. It's just what happens when you get history buffs together.
That's true.
Just a little bit.
That's true.
Did you get a different perspective though, being in the military? I mean, when did you get into journalism? Did you do that in the military?
No, I did intelligence reporting in the military.
So you were in military intelligence?
I was, and it was not an oxymoron when I was there, so don't even ask.
Yeah. Look at you now. From military intelligence to no intelligence.
But
I'm kidding, Paul. But you know, I thought about doing a promo to that effect on the show today.
But I will say this: that I did an awful lot of analysis and the writing of reports and the giving of presentations and the command briefings and what have you. And I really, when I got into journalism, which was not too long after I got out of the Navy, I wrote my stories pretty much as I did intelligence reports.
Wow. So that
I used that as a copy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's worked for you for a long time.
Well, I guess so.
The newspaper business, all of it has been here in South Carolina?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, all of mine.
First job as a writer in the real world out there, publishing here. Who were you with?
I did some freelance stuff. First things I did some freelance stuff was with the North Myrtle Beach Times.
Okay.
And Polly Loman up there.
Yeah, okay.
And then I wrote for some years with Dolores Scene.
Okay. Scene there for a while.
And then the Ori Independent, and then Greg.
Yeah. And the transformation over to the digital age with the website. When did Carolina Weekly come about?
We've had Carolina Weekly up for about 6 months. When Greg Everett, who is also the host on this show,
yeah, this is his show.
When he owned the Myrtle Beach Herald, of course, that's the last stint I had. His 5 years were the last 5 years I was in the newspaper business. When he left the newspaper business, he decided to come up with a website, and we kind of went together. And originally it was the Veterans Herald, which was just doing profiles on veterans, and then we decided to expand it So we still have a Veteran of the Week, but the Veterans Herald is not up anymore. We have Carolina Weekly up instead, so we can give a little bit broader scope to the. It's North Carolina and South Carolina, those two states we cover. Hence the Carolina Weekly, and the profiles give a little bit broader scope of the communities, or the state's communities, or however you look at it. You know what I'm saying? But I've done Secretary of State of North Carolina, and we've done the chairman of Horry County Council, for example. You know,
Sure.
I mean, you get that kind of a scope. And public servants, and I've done, there's been a number of interesting things in the nonprofit area. I mean, the amount of nonprofits that do good work, all of whom are suffering right now in these economic times, if we can bring a little bit of recognition to them, and maybe just even encourage one or two more people to come up with a few bucks to help them. I mean, they're hurting and they're doing more good work right now than they have, say, 5 or 8 years ago when money was easy. Maybe that's not a fair statement, but I think when money's tough and they're putting it where it should be.
I mean, I'll tell you how you got to pay the power bill or write a check to the charity. You got to pay the power bill first, and that's where it is for a lot of folks, especially in small business right now.
Oh yeah, I mean, and of course we do a lot of small business. The business of the week is basically small business. It's people like you, or people like Lucky Dog Television, for example.
When you touch on small business, what's happening here in Loris is a little different. I mean, there's so many small towns, and I have a little theory on it that a lot of it has to do with, you know, tobacco going away. This was a tobacco market town, and that was a large infusion of cash for a lot of southern towns wherever there were tobacco markets. You see towns that have dried up now. Loris is kind of an exception. Main Street still kind of thrives. We're not completely sold out on all our retail space yet, but there always seems to be that we're growing little baby steps. Even the last, as tough as the economy's been, we've had some franchise players decide to come in.
You have, and I personally, from being around Loris since '96, I believe that the mayor, in his leadership, David Studemeyer, has done whatever he felt he could to keep the town thriving, to encourage people to come in. And he's lost some major businesses. There's no doubt about it. I mean, not only the tobacco, I mean, there is no more tobacco auctions and what have you here. But by the same token, the car dealership is gone, the one that was in the center of town.
Not just one, but we had lost 3.
You lost 3.
We lost 3 ultimately when it was all said and done.
That's not easy to overcome. You know, that's a big tax base to go. But I think they've done everything they could to encourage. And the streetscape has certainly, you know, you have the ability to see Loris in the 1930s or 40s, and Loris in the 1980s, and then Loris in the 2010s. All of that is possible to see in one. You know, you only have to go a few blocks from this studio, and it looks like it looked 100 years ago.
Yeah. Well, let's touch back on the charity side of things, because you brought that up, and you've kind of had a shake-up in your own personal life the last year, and that's made you stronger, though, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it probably also tested my weaknesses too. But yes, my wife has been being treated for cancer for the last 14 months, or over 14 months now, and you know, if it wasn't for the American Cancer Society and things like Relay for Life, you know, she wouldn't be getting chemotherapy, because here's the real crux of that kind of a situation. We've got health insurance, always had health insurance. We've got pretty good health insurance, not too bad of a deductible, not too bad of a co-insurance. It pays 80% of the chemotherapy cost. Kathy gets chemotherapy twice a month. Each session costs around $13,000 a piece.
Right.
$26,000 a month. And 20% of that is $5,200 that I don't have. But it's people like the American Cancer Society and various private grants and what have you. You can apply for grants, or in our case, the Cancer Center where we go applies for the grants, and fortunately they've come through. And yes, it costs us money each month, but nowhere near what it could. Things like the Relay for Life, any of those fundraisers, not only for cancer, but for the Heart Association does the same thing for the heart. The March of Dimes does the same thing for little kids. The amount of private money that finds its way to help people like me and my wife continue and have a hope for a cure, or at least an extension of life, without it, we wouldn't be here.
Through all this tough stuff you've had to deal with last couple of years, has that affected your writing? Has it made you a better writer? I mean, were you more focused? I mean, and even how'd you do it, man? I wouldn't feel like even showing up if I was dealing with that.
I'm going to tell you, Jack, a lot of times I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, but I have a commitment to get 5 profiles up by Thursday at noontime, and that's good. Having a deadline is good.
Right.
You know, being regimented or having to be focused on something is good. But a lot of times you wake up in the morning and you don't feel like getting out of bed. I don't. I know Kathy doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not being negative. That's just being realistic. It hammers you. I think it has made me more aware of the nonprofit area, like I said, and also people in general, and where many people are coming from that I might have glossed over in the past. Yeah.
Sure. In the many interviews you've done, who stands out as someone that just knocked your socks off? You wanted to interview them and had to and did. Any names come to mind?
Boy, that's a tough one. I interviewed he retired as a Rear Admiral from the United States Navy. He was the second black graduate of Annapolis, the first one to make flag rank, and he was the guy that was in charge of. You've heard of the Vietnam, when we ultimately got to Vietnam and we sent the helicopters and they landed on the ships in '75 when we were evacuating people. Well, he was the guy that was in charge of that evacuation.
Wow,
He was out there. I enjoyed speaking to him.
I bet.
In a political standpoint, I can't think of one that stood out above another one, and that's sad. But I've done a lot on the state and local level, you know. Citizens, you find some incredible people just going down the street. You know, it's funny what you get into sometimes in these profiles that you go in thinking one thing. You face the same thing.
Sure.
You go in thinking one thing, or you maybe even have a list of questions, and none of them ever get asked because you get off in different tangents,
right.
as we've gotten off into many tangents this morning.
Yeah, from the Amish to where we are now.
From the Amish to where we are now.
I won't bring up Jesse Helms again.
No,
sorry.
That's not a good idea. Yeah, I mean, you just meet a lot of people. It's terrible as I sit here, but very few stand out in my mind. I did the dean of the North Carolina Central. Is it North Carolina Central, North Carolina A&T? What's up there in Raleigh?
Yeah, that's North Carolina Central.
North Carolina
yeah,
Central. The dean of their law school, that was an interesting guy.
Okay.
Because he also had a lot of experience in the Justice Department as well as then in the academic community.
Right.
He was a very interesting guy. I tell you, Greg Everett's father was an interesting guy.
Yeah, because you were touching. I was just thinking him. You know, that neck of the woods and law and you know.
He was a tremendously interesting man, and I mean what that family has accomplished has been in the legal sense and also in the military sense has been phenomenal. You know, I mean, and you got to get talking to people before it ever comes out.
It's great, and you end up winning because you get to talk to all these folks and you get an interesting perspective on history, and it kind of makes you the hit at dinner conversation. Just drawing on some of your experiences.
Well,
someone says, "Man, you're really smart." I was like, "Oh no, I've just talked to so many people.
Just talked to a lot
years,
of people,
and
right.
I retain a little bit,
That's
like
right.
a sponge." Paul, good seeing you, friend.
You
Keep
too,
up the
Jack.
good work. I appreciate you focusing the spotlight on me a while back. That was good.
Oh, it was fun.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun.
I always love the PR, man. I'll show up anywhere. I'm all about me. I'm kidding. Good seeing you, friend.
You too, Jack.
Hey, more All-American people here in just a bit. Stay tuned. Well, it's been said, everyone has a story, and folks like Paul Gable, they're responsible for getting that story out from time to time. CarolinaWeekly.com is where you'll find some great stories and an interesting perspective that only Paul Gable can bring to the table. No doubt about that. Paul, thank you for joining us here on All American People. Good to see you.